Smith, Director for District 3.
And Jason Allen, Executive Director of Student Learning.
Curtis Campbell, Director of Communications.
Rebecca Linder, Superintendent. And Erin, Rebecca's assistant. Literally all of it.
I'm John Bell, I'm the Executive Director of Student Services.
Greg Schwab, Assistant Superintendent.
Rob Baumgartner, Assistant Superintendent of HR.
Lydia Sonic, Executive Director. Helen Jones, Assistant Superintendent.
Tom Gerard, Director for District 4.
And Bob Kramer, also a board member.
Great, welcome everybody, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Weiner, or should I turn it over to Dr. Schwab?
You turn it over to me first, and then I'll pass it all around. You can see, obviously, all of our cabinet members, sitting around the table tonight. I tell people all the time that there is almost nothing that impacts a system from top to bottom in the way that a change to spell times does. You can adjust them here or there at a level by 3 to 5 minutes, but when you start to flip one level over another, it affects absolutely everything about your system, from custodial to food service, all the things that are operational, even beyond the student and family, experience in the district. So everybody wanted to be here tonight to hear the conversation, and, this is just the start of this conversation. This is to bring you up to speed with the committee that Greg co-chaired, and he'll talk about, throughout the year last year, and to get some direction from you about where we are thinking, you'd like us to head in the future as we continue to explore this. So, take it away, Greg, and thank you in advance to Greg for the amazing work he, did on this project last year.
All right, well, good evening, everybody, and I'm excited to talk to you about the work we did this school year, and I want to start obviously with our land acknowledgement first. We acknowledge the original inhabitants of this place, the Snohomish people and their successors of Toledo tribes, who since time immemorial have taken care of, hunted, fished, and gathered on these lands. We respect their sovereignty, their right to self-determination, and we honor their sacred spiritual connection with the land and water. By acknowledging these homelands, we are also committing to working with tribal nations to further the education aims they've identified in our classrooms and schools. So tonight I want to talk with you all about the work that we've been doing in the last school year, 23-24 school year, and then hopefully at the end of this conversation talk about some next steps for the 24-25 school year around the question of school start times. So this is not a new question, we've asked this question before, didn't we? Right? It probably feels a little bit like Groundhog Day, but here we are again. But I do think with what I have to share with you tonight, it's taken on a little bit of an interesting, different flavor this time. So I want to start by kind of going over who our task force was and how many meetings we had, and then I want to review the work. What did we do last year? What are the things that we talked about? We'll look at some research. What are our neighboring districts doing? We'll take a look at the current model of transporting students, how we currently handle transportation in Edmonds. And then we spent some time as a committee coming up with guiding priorities for our work. How are we going to make recommendations? What we're going to filter things through. And then we did a survey, which I'll talk about and share those survey results with you. And then at the end, I'll open it up for some conversation about what next steps are. So let's start with the task force. We had 38 members of the task force that met over 6 meetings during the 23-24 school year. The task force consisted of parents and family members, certificated staff, classified staff, building and district administrators, and students. So we started with why are we here? What is the task of this group? And really we focused on our job was at the end of all of our work was to come up with a recommendation that we could bring to you all about possible changes to our school start and end times. We grounded our work in understanding that research does support later start times for high school students, and that has shown improved academic outcomes. We also know that late start and end times at elementary doesn't necessarily capitalize on our younger students' best learning hours. And then we added a third wrinkle to this conversation, which had to do with our late start elementary schools. And there has been, I think it's probably, I don't know if it's an urban legend or what, but there's been some belief that at some point there was going to be a rotation. The schools that were the 9:30 to 4 o'clock window of time were not always going to be that. And so we did engage in some conversation around that as well. Would there be interest in doing some rotation of elementary school start times? That was the other question we asked. And we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get to the survey data.
I'm gonna just copy and here and say, it really is almost taken the level of urban myth. So the teachers will say like, oh, Andy's got something that says, the document that is signed, and I was like, if Andy had it, Andy would be sharing it. I checked with Andy, we've scoured our information, nobody can, like, people have a recollection of this, but nobody can find anything where promises were made or things were signed that said we were gonna rotate. So,
It doesn't exist.
we didn't.
But we still talk about it. So we started by focusing on what the research says. And at the end of the slide deck, I included a bibliography for you as well with the research that we cited. There was a 2018 study in Seattle that found that students slept an average of 34 more minutes per night when school start times were moved back an hour. And that their grades in biology as one course were 4.5% higher when start times were moved back an hour. There was a study done in Minnesota, 18,000 students found that GPAs increased slightly by moving start times back anywhere between 20 and 65 minutes. And another study in 2017 across 8 school districts in 17 states found that moving school start times to 8:30 or later resulted in improved school attendance and increased on-time graduation rates.
Can I think I've unpacked what that means. 8 districts in each of 17
Yes,
states.
yeah.
Yes, okay.
Yeah.
I was like, wait, how do we get 8 districts in 17 different states? Okay.
A 2014 study of 9,000 students in 8 public high schools found that moving start times to 8:30 or later resulted in the following: 60% or more of students got at least 8 hours of sleep per night, reporting less incidence of depression, less caffeine use, decreased substance abuse, improved academic performance in English, math, science, social studies on state tests, improved attendance and graduation rates, and a decrease by 70% in the number of car crashes by teenagers.
Wow, that's interesting, man.
Yeah.
Don't think I've seen that added before.
Yeah, it was a really interesting study.
Who,
And
do
then
you know who did that?
it's in the bibliography.
Oh, yeah, okay, thanks.
And then there was a study done by the American Education Research Association in 2022 that focused on elementary students and found that earlier school start times don't have a discernible effect on academic achievement for our younger students. And this recommendation was that it may be advisable to start elementary students earlier in order to allow for the later high school start times. And then we ended with this quote by Horacio de Iglesia, author of the study Adolescents are on One Schedule. The question is, what schedule will schools be on? He was quoted as saying that to ask a teen to be up and alert at 7:30 a.m. is like asking an adult to be awake and alert at 5:30 a.m.
Yeah.
So we've focused on that initially just to get a grounding in what the research says. And then we took a look at what are our surrounding districts doing. And I used the metric of start times and grad rates because we really, obviously we're focused on grad rates in Edmonds. And you can see that our 7:20 start time in Edmonds, we have an 83% grad rate. Everett starts at 7:30 and they've got a 93% grad rate. Shoreline starts at 7:50, they have a 90% grad rate. North Shore at 8:15, 96% grad rate. And Lake Washington starts at 8:30, and they have a 94% grad rate. So some correlation, but again, I don't know.
Do we know their
their
attendance rate?
I didn't pull that data for this, but I certainly would be interested.
I was curious,
Yeah.
particularly with the other work that I know you're doing, that you and Helen reported at
Yeah.
the foundation.
On the attendance.
Yeah, it was so interesting,
Yeah.
that it just made me make that connection.
I'm sure there's probably some kind of connection there too. I'd be curious to.
It would be interesting to know if similar correlations were there.
So then we shifted to talking about our current model of transportation. And so in Edmonds, we have what's called a tiered transportation model. We have 4 tiers. In a tiered model, bell times are scheduled so that one group of drivers can serve multiple groups of schools. And so you can see that we have our tier 1 is our high schools, and those, they have a bell time of 7:20. Then we have our first tier of middle schools and early start elementary schools, and those schools start at 8:10. And then we have a third tier which starts at 8:40, and our last tier starts at 9:30. And then you can see the same times going on 1:57, 2:40, 3:20, and 4 o'clock. Those are our 4 tiers. So then you can see here's how each of our schools are grouped into the tiers. So again, you see our high schools are in that first tier, and then we have our 4 middle schools, and then 4 of our early start elementaries, and then the majority of our elementary schools are in tier 3, and then the last of our schools are in tier 4.
And Greg, we have to keep 4 tiers.
Yes,
With
and I'll-
the given
yeah.
transportation.
Yeah, and I'll talk about that in a second. Okay. So we focus on some key transportation facts for Edmonds School District. In the 22-23 school year, we transported over 6,000 students. About 750 of those students were part of individualized programs, students served in special education, McKinney-Vento students. And the majority of our funding supports individualized transportation, which is required under law. And again, individualized transportation includes students with special needs, covered under IEPs, and students in homeless or foster status. Our transportation system requires about 120 bus drivers to be at work every day. On most days, every qualified bus driver, except office staff, is driving. That includes sometimes our transportation director, Ben Mount. He's out driving buses at very odd times. Our buses travel about 1.7 million miles each year. Edmonds School District 2 and from school transportation costs about $16 million per year. Transportation is currently fully funded by Washington State through funding that can only be used for to-school and from-school transportation. And while transportation funding is complex and a little bit opaque, we do believe we're near the maximum amount that the state will pay for transportation. So what are some considerations?
When you say that, do you mean, the amount they give us is close to what
We don't believe we can collect any more money than we're collecting from the state.
but we're not short, that's not
No.
part of our shortfall.
Is it part of our shortfall, Lydia? Don't believe it is.
It has not been since McCleary, it is starting to become so again. And it's a very opaque formula that oftentimes you have to spend more to get more.
I just know we've seen it on lists that other districts have said that it's a problem for them, but I hadn't thought it was a problem for us, so.
It has a lot, I mean, it is complex. It can be, some of the districts that it's quite a problem for might be geographically huge. You know, there are districts that are thousands of square miles. I was in a district that was, my initial district that I was superintendent, was 910 square miles. So we would run kids hour to 15 minutes and run that, well, inefficiently, because if I didn't run 2 buses out there, you know, I would end up, the kids could be on a bus for 2 hours, and I was like, well, we're not doing that. We'll send 2 and run it half full. But because they can see that you're operating inefficiently, you might not be recouping the full amount. So it impacts us much less than it does some other district with some other complexities.
Thank you.
So as we talked about bell times, we have some considerations that the committee had to keep in mind. One of the first ones is that we've reached the maximum number of drivers available to us. We are doing a lot of recruiting and retention efforts, but really that's keeping us kind of at one stable. We're not adding more drivers. We're basically able to we're hiring enough drivers to keep us stable, but we're not able to increase drivers. And our system is under a lot of stress due to the lack of school bus drivers. Since the pandemic, we've reduced our routes from about 150 to less than 120 routes. We continue to offer transportation to everyone who we offered it to before the pandemic, and we've even added transportation to Scarborough Lake High School and ECAP, needs-based early education. So most of the students who ride in our yellow buses have no other way to school.
And we just,
So we then engaged in a conversation and spent a lot of time talking about what should the priorities of this group be? What are the things that we want to filter any recommendations that we make through? And we came up with 5. We wanted to ensure that whatever recommendation we came up with was equitable for students, staff, and families. That we really ensured that our focus was on mental health and well-being of our students and our staff. The schedules that we came up with should be developmentally appropriate. Safety was a main concern, a main priority. And then lastly, that we're being fiscally responsible. We made it very clear that we're not gonna go out and buy 10 more buses and hire, 100 more drivers. We don't have that ability to do that. So we have to work with our existing system and with our existing drivers and existing tiers to come up with whatever recommendation we make.
I'm curious why there isn't a priority of student achievement or student graduation or student attendance.
Yeah, again, I think that was, we engaged in a big process of papers all over the walls, and that wasn't necessarily surfaced, so, I mean, I do think it again, as a driving factor. I mean, it's one of the primary reasons why we do it.
I think given our strategic plan, our board goals and our district goals, that would certainly be a priority as well.
So, in spring of 2024, we developed and sent out a survey to our stakeholder groups. We surveyed staff members, parents and guardians, students and community members. There were 7,408 respondents to the survey. The survey was offered in Arabic, English, Portuguese, Spanish, and Ukrainian. And you can see the total number of responses there, the largest number being our English-speaking community, and then Spanish was second.
Greg, do we know if that number is roughly proportional to the percentage of the language speakers in the district?
These are our top 5 languages.
Okay, but like, if, well, I'm just pulling numbers out of nowhere, but if 20% of the district spoke Spanish, and only 2% responded, we would say there's a gap.
Yeah.
Do we know if that roughly lines up like that?
Oh, no, I don't think it does.
Okay.
Again, I think it was very under, our communities that don't speak English are very underrepresented.
Okay.
Karen's computer.
Yeah. It's dramatic.
For emphasis. Okay, so we asked folks to identify themselves by the 4 categories: student, parent, staff member, community member, and they were asked to identify any school they were associated with. So you can see that 4,000 of our respondents, just over 4,000 were parents, 2,000 were students, 1,400-ish were staff, and then about 300 community members. And then you can see that the largest came from our pre-K elementary parents, and then our high school students were the second largest group of staff, of people who responded to this group. So, analysis of the questions. What questions did we ask? So the first question we asked was, and so the survey started with an explanation about why we were doing this, and talked about the research. What does the research say about later start times for high school? So there was a big, long introduction to the survey. So we provided them with a lot of information up front. And then we asked the first question, given the information that we provided to you, to what extent do you support changing high school start times to later in the 25-26 school year? We picked a target date. And you can see that between strongly support and somewhat support, 88% of survey respondents indicated that they either strongly supported or somewhat supported changing high school start times based on the information we gave them about moving start times. And you can see, again, here's how it broke out by the different groups. Might be yours. Maybe my HDMI is wonky out there. Okay.
Wait just for a second for your husband. Look at this. Light blue is.
The light blue is staff members. Okay. So
And
then
this was in Friday.
we asked
But I just wanted to make sure.
we asked the opposite question, given the information provided above. To what extent
There you go.
To what extent do you support keeping start times the same around 7:15 a.m.? And again, you can see the exact opposite at about 76% of respondents either somewhat opposed or strongly opposed keeping start times the same.
And I'll pause here just to interject. When Greg started this endeavor, we sort of had a chuckle because examining school start times, you know, I've been around long enough, this has come around a few times, right? So I was like, sorry, Greg, I'm probably gonna task you with the committee that is an exercise in futility because you're gonna, and we were shocked when we saw these survey results. I mean, it's a much more of a mandate with a very large turnout than we've ever seen before.
Yeah,
which
so
is
it's
why,
really
like,
different than the
Yeah.
results we've seen over the years.
Yeah.
So then again, the same disaggregation of responses by different groups. So then we asked the question, would you support creating a rotation for elementary school start times? This was the third question, and not surprisingly, a little tepid on this response. About 57%, or 53% said they don't support a rotation of elementary start times at all, and the other 47% fell out into yes every 5 years, yes every 7 years, or yes every 10 years.
And this was all of them, not just the elementary people
Yeah,
responding.
yeah. Well, they did not all the people responded to this question. If you look at the total number of responses, I believe it was 1,800, so it's a little bit less, not all.
So some high schools.
Some high school folks do.
Like, I don't
Not my question. Okay, and the survey did have skip logic, so it was able to, there were questions that if you selected a certain, you skipped over questions that weren't you, that didn't pertain to you. And then again, you can see disaggregated by group. Okay. So then, I made the mistake of asking for narrative responses. 7,000 response survey, but before I get to that, we then gave them a list of like statements and said, is this a concern for you or not a concern for you? So it's things like, changing start times would impact non-district after-school activities, sports, for me or someone in my family, and we asked them to say, is this a concern for you? Moderate concern, somewhat concern, large concern, not a concern at all. And so you can see the variety of statements and how they responded to those as well.
And when I looked at this earlier, it seemed like, even though mostly they weren't concerned with money, the ones, and this has been a sticking point in the past, were athletics
Yeah.
being switched.
Yeah.
After school things being before school.
Yeah, definitely some things.
But it's not like really compelling, how, they're not like.
Yeah, they're not freaking out about it this time for sure, yeah. So then, then I asked, the question, please respond to the following statements. So again, I asked ChatGPT, have you heard of it? So I kind of plugged it in, I said, kind of summarize this for me. And so overall, the majority of the respondents didn't see it for any concern, didn't see the proposed changes as a significant concern. However, there are some notable percentages of moderate and large concerns in areas such as impact on actual jobs, responsibilities at home, and shifts in activity schedules. So then we got into then we asked people for narrative responses. So this is where I really used ChatGPT, which is pretty amazing.
Well, that's a brilliant way to
Yeah.
have open-ended, which we never had before.
I know, I can't
I'm
imagine
so
going over
jealous.
325 written comments or 1,400 on the next question that I got. But anyway, so again, same thing, I asked them to say, if you indicated other in question 10, were there any other concerns? Are there other things that you wanted to comment on? So this kind of summarizes what other things that people commented on. So impact on after-school activities, which I think we've heard before, transportations and commutes, academic performance and attendance, family and child care logistics were some of the themes that emerged when people responded to that question, the other question.
I think that the piece about, the people who say academic performance and attendance, which was a question I had initially when approached about, why we should start high school later. I was like, well, they just stay up later. Like, if they're starting their work at 4, well, they just stay up till 2 to get it done, if we're saying they're getting off at 2 and they're staying up at midnight. But the research doesn't bear that out. The research says they sleep more if you start later. So I think that one of the things people say is thinking the students might just stay up later and not benefit from the change. Was certainly a concern I had, but so far the districts that have done undervaluing, it doesn't seem to be the case.
I found this research also, they go to bed at the same time,
Yeah.
but they just can sleep later in the morning.
Yeah,
Which benefits, has tremendous benefit.
yeah.
So then, additional comments were around health and sleep, impact on elementary and middle schools, and again, concerns about somebody's gonna have to go early in this proposed model. We have questions about survey design and data integrity. Again, I think anytime you do a survey, people are gonna ask questions about your survey. Safety concerns, and then equity and accessibility were the themes that emerged from the question, we're asked folks to comment on other. So then question 12, is there any feedback you would like to provide about changing start times for elementary, middle, and high schools? And this was the one where I got 1,373 comments. Provided written comments, but again, we're able to summarize them with AI. So again, health and sleep was one of the themes that people commented on. And then impact on after-school activities was another thing that people commented on. Transportation logistics, so you're seeing some of the same things they're kind of surfacing again and again. Consistency and routine was a theme, equity and accessibility again came up as a theme. safety, academic performance, survey design and communication. So, from all of this, we engaged in a conversation at the end of last school year as a committee about, you know, what's next. And so I think we feel like there is a need to continue to really develop communication about this, any changes that we're proposing. Continue to gather more feedback. This was just one survey that we've done. We feel like we need to do more feedback gathering from folks. We definitely need to do some work on family and childcare logistics. Again, I think any kind of change like this is going to require us to have work with our childcare partners to help solve some of those challenges that families might encounter with any kind of shift in start times. And then other considerations, and then this is really one that we spend a lot of time talking about, that given the plan to shift to a 6-8 middle school model in 28-29, and the resulting boundary revisions that are going to come with that, how realistic is the change at this time, knowing that in just we do this change in a couple of years, and then a couple of years later we're doing it again because we've redrawn boundaries and those kinds of things. So those were all things that we talked about, and so really that's where we're at, is we're, and then into the references. So we're really at the place to have the conversation, and so we're, you know, we haven't scheduled any meetings yet with the group, but I plan to have full meetings again this week with this committee. And I did let them know that one of the first things we would do this school year is have a study session for all of you to get your thoughts and so for all of you to give us some direction about next steps and where you think this should be going.
You know, one other thing in terms of a next step that I'd be interested in is checking in with those districts that you know, our neighboring districts, and finding out how long did they take in making that decision, and what kind of, how bad, how difficult, how challenging was it in the first year in terms of making it, what were their lessons learned?
Yeah.
You know, and how long did it take, you know, anyway.
Sure.
Trying to sort of get more information from them about their process and history.
Yeah.
That we might be able to mitigate some by
Yeah.
knowing what they went through.
Yeah, I did lean on North Shore and Lake Washington pretty heavily,
Okay.
in terms of just kind of some of the things that they did, and we kind of structured
Right.
our process around theirs, and they engaged in a multi-year process. It wasn't they did a long runway to plan for, so I would say it was about 2 years.
2 years.
About 2 years of really, you know, thoughtful planning and really engaging in a lot of community conversations, to build that consensus. And even then, you know, there were some issues along the way.
I was at Northland when they did the process, and the survey results initially were 50-50 split on later start times. A lot of review on changing the number of tiers down to 3, which of course was cost prohibitive. So then it was, you know, start some schools earlier so the high schools can go later. And so I had the benefit of 2 children doing the slightly later start time, you know, switch.
What do you see in terms of that for your own family?
It was initially like, oh, we get out so late now, and then just became the norm, and just, you know, got used to it, so, I would, but, you know, it was all good, all fine either way.
I'll tell a funny little story. I think it's a funny little story about the way you just phrased it, which is later start times. When I was working in Shoreline, I was meeting with students one day, and I said, just a quick poll, how many of you in this class would like a later start time? 100% of them raised their hand, and I said, I'm a little bit surprised by that. I figured some of you would have after-school music lessons or jobs or something that you would not want to get out later. And I said, wait, you get out later too? And then it was like 40% after that. Like they were like, oh no, we would not want to do that. I was like, yeah, it's just the whole day. But Charlotte has not undergone a change. They've had that 750 for a long time. And so they've talked about it, but they have not made any changes. Yeah, I should have.
Seems like there's a strong mandate based on the data to continue
geographic school size, number of schools, is you have to flip-flop. Because in order to just add more routes, it's very expensive. So what is the cost of, say, you know, moving a high school later and changing this elementary so that you still have that bus driver going, you know, 4 and then 4 in the afternoon? Not quite sure. It's very difficult to get at if they're still doing, you know, their 8 runs a day, but you can't add more runs. Nobody can afford it. So if you maintain a 4-tier system and flop start times around, there obviously is, you know, those one-time costs and surveys and communication and outreach. And then the thought is hopefully once it's all said and done, it settles down.
So it'd be a wash in the end, but just implementation would
Yeah.
have some one-time costs.
So, Hawk, really what we're talking about is like take tier 1 and tier 1 schools move into tier 2 as an example, and then so somebody out of tier 2, 3 or 4 would need to move into tier 1. So the times remain the same. So really, to Lydia's point, the only things that we're really talking about are things we need to do to make sure that people understand this is the change is coming and you're doing routes. And I think the other thing we've talked about doing too, and Ben was part of the conversation with the committee at that point, was if you look at the way our schools are currently allocated into different tiers, there isn't like a geographical like rhyme or reason to it. It just kind of it just is. And so we talked about also can we gain some efficiencies by looking at are there some geographical reorganization of schools that we can do at the same time to get schools into tiers that are more, so we can be more efficient with our transportation to try to do some of this out as well. So that's part of the conversation that we've started thinking about. Okay, if we say we're going to flip high schools to tier 2, and then let's say just for sake of argument we're going to go tier 3 is going to go to tier 1. So then we may also have to do some moving of schools within those tiers to try to get that geographical reorganization that makes a little more sense, so that a school's not driving from one end, or a bus is not driving from one end of the district to the other.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering, curious about the time frames of each of those tiers. Can they be shrunk?
Yeah, and we've talked about it. Ben talked a lot about that, and certainly I think there are some efficiencies that can be gained by doing some restructuring, reorganization of schools so that we're more geographically aligned.
Because we may be able to, you know, tier 1 might be able to start at like 7:30 instead of 7:20.
Yeah, I think that's
like tinkering around the edges, but still it might be more easy for
The difficulty there is traffic and gridlock only continues to increase in this area. That's the sticking point. If you're just driving, rather than getting stuck at every other light.
Does this impact our McKinney-Vento program much? I mean, it would just be okay.
Yeah, no, it wouldn't. Maintaining our current tier model of tiers, it would allow us to continue to do transportation for our individualized transportation needs.
So I'm thinking about this last consideration, which is thinking about what are the advantages and or disadvantages to doing it in 25, 26, as opposed to waiting till the change. And of course, I don't understand all the complexities. However, what I'm thinking is, if we did it earlier, then the change is tied to the schools. Yes, kids will be changing schools once we go to a 6-8 model. But how much would it change bus schedules? Because it's still, if you're going to this school, this is what the start and end times are. So that I'm not sure of what the impacts would be in terms of saving things by waiting. And I mean, my gut, but you know, this is kind of where I'm constantly, I'd prefer to see it done sooner rather than later if it's gonna affect our students' achievement, learning, graduation, and attendance. Rather than waiting, that's a lot of years, isn't that 3 years we're talking about?
3 years.
It's a long time that we are not doing something that might really positively impact our kids in a lot of different ways. Particularly when that change that would be occurring in the 6 to 8 model, it isn't that related. I mean, we're gonna have to change boundaries and everything else, but it's still gonna be, the schedules are gonna be tied to schools, not to other stuff. Am I right? Am I missing something?
Well, when we do the 6 to 8 shift, we haven't talked about this, but I'm assuming we'll be looking to balance our elementary schools a little bit more
Right.
too.
Yeah.
So it's gonna be a major, major shift in routing, et cetera, because it won't just be like, this is still the catchment area for Edmonds L, and this is still the kids who go to Spruce. It won't only impact the middle schools, it will impact potentially the
Right, oh,
elementaries as
I
well.
would, and hopefully fix the boundaries so that if
Right.
you live across the street from a school, you're not, boundarized. And everybody else can make their roads right down there, but
Right.
having to drive 2 miles.
So there's potentially some bigger it's gonna be rerouting the whole transportation, doing all the scheduling again. I'm just gonna put on the table, and maybe I'm being too conservative, I don't think we can go in 25, 26. I mean, that would be rolling this message out probably in March. And, to give families at least some runway for this, March, like 6 months from now. I think that's pretty tight, to have all of, working with all of our, childcare providers and community-based organizations and everything, to have a really complete package for families to say, here's all your options. That would be an accelerated schedule. I think we could do it in 26, 27, which would still be 2 years before this. I just think 25, 26.
It's faster.
It's fast, and I'm not sure we're gonna do it very well, and I think we may increase community frustration versus saying in March, a decision's been made that the following year, this is going to happen, and by November, you'll hear about childcare providers, and we'll be having a fair, and by this date, and by this date, and by this date, that we could do that in a really, well-organized way, rather than like TBD to parents in March, which is not gonna make sense.
Yeah, I do see the next steps for the committee being to, okay, let's figure out which schools are gonna go in which tiers, and bring that to all of you as a recommendation. And then do a whole lot of stakeholder input gathering about, okay, here's what we're thinking, and again, get feedback, and I'm sure that, I'm gonna go on a limb and say, probably survey results may change a little bit when people see that. Yeah, this is now.
What is my school?
Right,
As opposed to this abstract.
But I think we need to engage in that conversation, as Rebecca's saying, about just giving people, here's all of our thinking, and, but I think it's something we've gotta make the decision about who's gonna go on which tiers, so that we can get started on communicating out. Here's what we're thinking, and here's what we think might work, based on what you told us, that there seems to be pretty broad-based support for some kind of change in school start times. The thing I don't know how to tackle still is the elementary rotation piece. That gets a little more complicated, and it certainly added a layer of complexity to the conversations that we had last school year. And I'm not sure, so I think we need to come back and probably ask that question again. I don't know what's happening.
I know.
I give up. I'm just gonna.
You gotta move the rabbit ears around, you should be able to.
I didn't know that while we were chatting, so we're already on it.
Okay, good. So I think that's another, I think we need to do more work on asking that question, because I think there were people that felt like that question on the survey, they felt like it was maybe a leading question, and so I think we need to do a little more work specifically on that particular piece if we are going to engage in some kind of conversation around it.
And there's one group of staff members more than others who want that change.
Yeah.
And,
Staff members who want it, as
Yes,
opposed
it's
to parents.
the late start elementary staff members.
late start elementary staff members feel like, and when I talk to them about it, they say things like, we always have to take sick leave to go get, an eye appointment, a dentist appointment, because we get out so late, my day doesn't end until 4:30. The teachers at the elementary schools on the first year can get a 3 o'clock dental appointment, and, so that's the piece where they say, if you look at somebody who's been in a late start elementary school, at their sick leave base versus, they have anecdotes about people who get like radiation for cancer, who are able to balance that in an early school, somebody else has to take leave, So it's but some of the earlier folks say, it's nice not to rotate. It's not, so it's.
But wouldn't there be fewer elementaries in the late tier, because we're moving high schools later? Or, we don't know what they're.
I think one of the things that we'll have to engage in is, once we move the tiers around, we need to go and look at what's the ridership in each tier, and make sure that we're able to because we may have to move some schools out of different tiers in order to make sure the ridership in each tier matches the capacity that we have for the buses.
I think it's really important that we don't miss the opportunity, like Grace said at the beginning, to say, it makes no sense. This school's been in this tier, they really belong here. That's gonna improve our efficiency, it's gonna make the buses less crowded, it's gonna give the kids shorter rides, you know, so I think that we also wanna make sure we don't miss any other opportunities when we're doing this.
You know, I really am excited about this, actually. The last time, I just wanted to check, the last time we did this, it seemed that childcare really rose to the top for
Childcare was
this.
a major issue.
It was the huge major, I believe we had 3 hours of public testimony on this, and that was the theme, right? And so to the point of doing this right, rather than quickly, I think that outreach, I think as we start doing these adjustments and people realize it's their school, I can see that one being a really important piece of this.
And since since then, we know how to write at school, we have much more robust.
See, that was when a lot of schools didn't have the before and after.
So I think we're gonna be able to address that, I think. But it's gonna take work with our partners to make sure that we can meet that need, for sure.
And in some ways, it's kind of, I think that'll be very interesting to see how that plays out, because in some ways, it's a whole new world from that perspective anyway. So even if a parent is working until 4:30 or 5, they may not be commuting from Seattle.
Right.
They may be working at, you know,
Right, flex schedule.
in their home, or flex scheduling. So I think that question, I don't know how it will be different. I suspect it's going to be a very different question and answer than it was, the last time.
The last time we did this.
So with, from my previous question, about just general, can't think of what I'm thinking about now, but just the input coming from all our different groups equally. Is there plans for outreach, like how are we gonna make sure that it's not overwhelmingly white English speaking people?
Thank you. And we did talk about that, and we're gonna need to do some more targeted outreach. We need to go out into the community and engage in some people, engage with people, community centers or, apartment complexes, wherever we need to go. I think we wanna make sure that we're doing a really broad base of outreach to make sure that we're targeting those families that aren't necessarily gonna check their email and respond to us right away.
Yeah.
So we have to do more of that, definitely, for sure.
And then I had one other thing, and I don't think this would be, this shouldn't be a reason that we don't change, but it is a potential for a self-inflicted wound when it comes to after-school activities, which is, and I'm gonna give it to you from the officiating standpoint, which is, I cannot tell you how many times I've either done a doubleheader in Edmonds, because I can do JV and varsity, because we started for it, or done a game here and then driven across town to another school that gets out later and starts later. And then we also have this issue where, as far as I know, we're the only district that does this, we pull King County officials for boys sports and Snohomish County officials for girls sports, so it's 2 different groups we're working with. And so, I think that it's important that we work with that group and just ask, do we have to move games so that we get JV players an equal number of games to what they are used to having, or do we move, what are we gonna do? Because there could definitely be an issue with getting people out to these games now that we're asking, if every game's gonna start at 6, it's gonna cause some issues.
Yeah, I have Angie on the committee, so she's been asking those questions.
Awesome.
Sure.
I mean, that's kind of what I was like, where's Angie?
Yeah.
Sure.
She's
But good.
on the committee.
Okay.
The other districts that have already done it also are part of the whole varsity and junior varsity scene, so
Yes.
they somehow worked it out.
Yes, what I'm saying is we have a system, and then we're gonna be changing the system, so let's make sure that we don't somehow screw ourselves over by doing it the wrong way.
Great work,
So,
great.
thank you. So we're excited. I'll be, like I said, I'm gonna be setting a couple of meetings, and I'm hopeful that by, before the end of the calendar year, that we'll have something to bring back to all of you as here's our thinking about what we think might work for reorganizing tiers.
As a possible implementation for 26, 27.
I think that's what we're thinking. Yeah, that's what I'm hearing you say. I think I'm hearing.
That's what I'm
I think we're all kind of agreeing that 26, 27 seems like the soonest that it could be done.
Yeah, it seems like that's the
Yeah.
soonest, but does anybody have an interest in waiting? Or does everybody sort of
Yeah, that's
also think that urgency for kids is urgency for us to make this change?
It seemed that if we look at 26, 27, or, what did we just do, 26,
So we're
27?
not looking
And
at-
that'll inform us a little better if we should wait,
Yeah.
right? It's because I think it seems like we need some more next step information on, if it's like, no, we really need to wait because of X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
If they start thinking about 26, and say, gosh, based on everything you've said, now we think we should wait, and if you say now 28, 29, and then you hear what they have to say, and say, well, maybe we could.
Yeah,
So,
okay, yeah.
to your point, they could, you can always
Delay. You can always delay, yeah.
delay from there if that, but if they start thinking about that, they can start thinking.
But I would say we should take steps as if we're gonna aim
Yes.
toward the 26, 27, so that we're poised to be able to do it.
Yeah.
If the data come back from our community that says, yeah, go with this.
That's what we're thinking.
Okay, that makes sense.
Great.
Right.
All right. Thank you all.
Anything else for the good of the order? Thank you all so much. It's great to see everybody. Okay, this, special session of the Edmonds School District